My name is Zeke Thornfield, and for as long as I can remember, the land west of Black Hollow Ridge belonged to my family. 847 acres of wild oak, golden hills, and rolling pastureland, passed down from my grandfather, a quiet man with calloused hands and a sharp mind. He never trusted banks, never trusted men in suits, and certainly never trusted anyone with a clipboard and a contract. His word was his bond, his land was his blood. I left home 20 years ago, chasing something I couldn't name: education, adventure, maybe just noise. But the land always called me back, and when I came home after years away, I expected to see the same creaky gate, the red barn leaning left in the wind, and the same old iron mailbox half buried in weeds. But what I saw instead made my stomach knot: paved roads, cul-de-sacs, mailboxes in tight rows, rows of beige, soulless homes stamped out like cookies, each with a tiny fenced yard and a realtor's sign still leaning on the porch. I drove slowly, heart pounding, deeper into what used to be our north field, only to see children riding scooters on what used to be a cattle trail. It wasn't just a few homes, it was a full-blown subdivision. 98 houses, all of them built, paved, landscaped, and lived in on my family's land. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe my uncle sold the land. Maybe my mother signed something in my absence. Maybe someone pulled a fast one while I was away. But after one long, painful call with the county clerk's office and 2 days spent crawling through old archives, I found what I needed: the original land deed from 1924. It was hand-signed by my grandfather, William H. Thornfield, faded and yellowed but clear as day, and there on the second page was something most people would have skipped: a railroad easement, unused and legally binding, running straight through the heart of that entire subdivision. The same easement that tied the land back to me. Someone messed up, big, but I didn't say a word, not yet, because before I made a move, I wanted to see who was behind all this, who signed off on building nearly 100 homes on land they didn't truly own. So I walked into the neighborhood's HOA meeting quietly, sat in the back, and watched as a woman named Karen Delaney stood up in front of the residents like a queen in her castle. She spoke with pride, talking about community vision, enforcing regulations, and protecting property values. She even bragged about how their HOA was the most aggressively managed in the state. People clapped. She had no idea I was there, and she definitely had no idea she was standing on land that still legally belonged to me. I didn't need applause. I had something better: time, patience, and the law. Zeke stepped off the train into the late summer heat, squinting against the sun as it beat down on the dusty roads of his hometown. Thornfield Ranch hadn't changed much, at least that's what he thought as he drove toward the property. But a few miles in, his jaw locked: suburbia, neatly spaced homes, vinyl fences, kids on scooters. Lawns manicured with robotic precision. It looked like any HOA development in California, except it was supposed to be his ranch. He slammed the brakes on his pickup, kicking up a plume of dust. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. The faded wooden sign still read Thornfield Ranch, ESD, 1924, but behind it stood street signs he didn't recognize: Cedar Loop, Sunset Grove, Karen Ridge, Belvedere. He pulled onto a wide paved road lined with cookie-cutter houses. Mailboxes sat in rows, SUV in driveways. As he slowly drove through, residents waved at him like he was some lost tourist. Zeke didn't wave back. His hands were shaking. It felt like a nightmare. The family ranch, 847 acres passed down from his grandfather, had become a subdivision while he was away handling overseas contracts, and no one had bothered to contact him. No letters, no calls, no inquiries. Just homes, dozens of them. He parked near a small HOA community center. Its modern stone facade and smug architectural lines screamed bureaucracy. Inside, a young woman at the desk smiled and asked if he was there for the landscaping committee. Zeke shook his head. "I'm here to talk about this land because I own it, every inch." Her smile faded instantly. Moments later, an older woman in a stiff navy pantsuit came out, clipboard in hand, heels clicking like threats. "You must be mistaken," she said without offering her name. "This development was legally approved by the county. We represent over 98 homeowners, and you are currently trespassing." Zeke didn't flinch. Name's Zeke Thornfield. Maybe you've heard of the ranch. My grandfather built it. This land's been in my family since 1924. I've got the deed, the plats, the maps, and something your committee probably didn't expect." He took a breath, then dropped the bomb. "A railroad easement, buried in the original deed, never revoked and never surrendered." The woman blinked, then laughed that short, dismissive chuckle only people with power think they've earned. "That's ridiculous. 100-year-old easement. You think that overrides 21st-century planning permissions?" Zeke just smiled. "I don't think, I know, and I've already contacted a land surveyor and an attorney. You built on my property. Every foundation, every garage, every pool, all of it on my land." She tried to call security. He walked out before they arrived. That night, Zeke didn't sleep. He sat on the hood of his truck parked just outside the subdivision, watching porch lights flicker off one by one. He wasn't angry, not yet. What he felt was something deeper, cold, methodical, like the slow draw of a lever on a train engine. He wasn't going to rage. He was going to reclaim. And tomorrow, Karen and her entire HOA would learn that land remembers. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced as I stared at the old map on my dining table, the aged parchment glowing beneath a desk lamp. The words railroad easement haunted me. They weren't just scribbles on a deed. They were leverage, power, a relic of a forgotten law that could crack this entire HOA development wide open. I made some calls, first to a land use attorney, then to an old friend at the county archives. When I mentioned the 1924 deed and its easement clauses, there was silence on the line. Then, "Zeke, if what you're saying is accurate, you may be sitting on the biggest land rights case this county's seen in decades." The next morning, I drove into town. I walked into the records office like a man on a mission. The clerks knew me. My grandfather's land was the stuff of legend out here. I laid out my copy of the deed, and one of them raised her eyebrows. "That easement line runs straight through the center of the development," she murmured, tracing a finger across the plat map. "Technically, you own it. Every lot touched by that corridor might be invalid. Might be. I needed it to be definite." That's when I pulled out the aerial surveys, dated ones, from decades ago, showing the exact trajectory of the old tracks. They ran in a perfect diagonal line, slicing the new homes cleanly in half. And then came the kicker, the HOA original development proposal, submitted without knowledge of the easement. They'd built 98 homes over a railroad easement that had never been legally vacated or sold. That meant every inch of it, from the sidewalks to the living rooms, was still legally part of the Thornfield Ranch. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. This wasn't just a technicality. This was my land. And they'd paved over it without asking, without even checking. It was time to get a survey crew out there, and then it was time to knock on some doors. I arrived at the development entrance in my dusty old Ford truck, a full survey crew behind me in 2 marked vehicles. It was a strange sight: fancy mailboxes, pristine driveways, manicured lawns, all sitting unknowingly on my land. I could already feel the eyes on me as I stepped out. The first person to confront me wasn't a homeowner, it was her again. Karen, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, fake smile plastered across her face like nothing ever happened. "Zeke," she said, as if we were old friends, "you're not authorized to be here. This is private property, HOA enforced." I didn't say a word. I just handed her a copy of the original 1924 deed, my grandfather's easement rights clearly marked, and a certified letter from my attorney. Karen glanced down, visibly confused, then annoyed. She tried to dismiss it, waving it off as outdated legal nonsense. But I saw the twitch in her brow. The fear was creeping in. By midday, the survey team had set up their instruments. Lasers danced across the roads, marking the old railroad line. Homeowners peeked through curtains and stood on porches. I didn't blame them. I would have done the same. One man came up to me, probably mid-30s, dad of 2. "What's this about?" he asked. "We just bought this place last year." I looked him in the eye. "They built your house on land that doesn't belong to them," I said quietly. "It's mine, always has been." The word spread like wildfire. People gathered in the cul-de-sac. Karen tried to control the crowd, but every time someone asked a question, she deflected. A couple of neighbors pulled out their own deeds. None of them mentioned the easement. That's when they started to understand they hadn't been lied to by me. They'd been lied to by her. That evening, I met with my lawyer at a quiet diner on the edge of town. He laid it out plain and simple. You have the upper hand, Zeke. The HOA didn't do their due diligence. These homes were built illegally, and legally speaking, you own the land under every one of them. It hit me hard. This wasn't about fences or cows anymore. This was about 98 families, 98 homes, and decades of legal chaos ahead. I didn't want to destroy lives, but I sure as hell wasn't going to be trampled. As the sun set behind the distant hills of my ranch, I looked out over the land that had been my grandfather's pride. And now, maybe more than ever, it needed me to fight for it. The courthouse was packed. I never thought I'd see the day where nearly 100 of my new neighbors would be sitting in pews behind me, some angry, others confused, and a few just praying I wouldn't go through with what I had every right to do. Karen stood at the front with her high-priced HOA lawyer, still wearing that smug expression she'd mastered so well. She thought she'd win on confidence alone, but this wasn't a beauty pageant. This was court. And I had something far more powerful than swagger. Proof. The judge, a stern woman in her late 60s, with a no-nonsense glare, called the hearing to order. My attorney laid it all out, clearly and professionally. He walked through every document, the original land survey from 1924, the rail company's dissolution in 1961, the easement that had never been vacated, and the tax records that had been paid faithfully in my grandfather's name, then my father's, then mine. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably as he explained how the developer had ignored multiple title discrepancies and how the HOA land acquisition had never been legally filed with the county. In essence, these homes were squatting on my land. Karen's lawyer stood and began his argument, but he was shaky, grasping at straws, trying to claim the easement was outdated and should have been nullified. The judge wasn't buying it. She interrupted him more than once, asking questions he clearly wasn't prepared to answer. At one point, Karen rose and requested to speak. The judge allowed it. She turned to the crowd and said, "This man has had every opportunity to work with us and refused. This is an act of revenge, nothing more." I stood. The judge gave me a nod. "No, Your Honor." I said calmly, "This isn't revenge. This is about accountability. This HOA tried to erase history. They buried the truth, bulldozed a family's legacy, and then acted like they owned the place. I didn't start this war, but I sure as hell intend to finish it." The room went silent. Then the judge spoke. "Based on the presented evidence, it is the court's finding that Mr. Ezekiel Carter is the legal title holder of the disputed property. All constructions erected without proper authorization constitute unlawful occupation." Karen paled. Her lawyer sat down with the weight of defeat pressing hard on his shoulders, but then came the twist. The judge looked at me and said, "Mr. Carter, you have the legal authority to evict the residents and reclaim your land. However, given the humanitarian concerns involved, I'm ordering a 90-day stay of enforcement that gives both parties time to negotiate a civil solution." I nodded. I wasn't here to make 98 families homeless in a day, but I wasn't going to let them stay rent-free on what my grandfather built with his bare hands. Outside the courthouse, a mob of reporters waited. I kept my head down, said nothing. Karen, however, ran straight to the cameras. "We will appeal this decision," she barked. "This is far from over." But it was over. The law was clear, and for once, Karen didn't get to rewrite the ending. That night, I drove back to the ranch. The air was quiet, the stars piercing the dark sky like they always had when I was a boy. I stood by the old oak tree at the edge of the easement and looked out over the land that was still, and always would be, mine. A few days later, letters went out to every homeowner in that development. They weren't threats, they were offers. I'd set up an LLC and offered them new leases at fair market rates. I wasn't looking to destroy anyone's dream, just to remind them who the land belonged to. Many were stunned, some were grateful, a few were furious, but most understood the situation for what it really was, an HOA screw-up that had been swept under the rug until it exploded. Karen tried one last time to fight back. She rallied the board, sent out furious emails to residents, even started a social media campaign accusing me of land fraud, but the damage was done. Her influence collapsed when it was revealed that she'd signed off on the land acquisitions without ever verifying the titles, and that she'd personally profited from the administration fees charged to every homeowner in the process. By the time the 90 days were up, Karen had resigned from the HOA board, quietly, no apology, no admission of guilt, just gone, and me, I went back to fixing fences and feeding cattle. The land felt a little different now. Quieter, but I never regretted standing up for it. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was about legacy, about honoring the man who built that dam and raised a family from the dust. The man who taught me that land is more than dirt and rock, it's memory, identity, and home. And now that legacy is protected, written in ink, stamped by the court, because no matter how much concrete they poured, no matter how many white fences they built, or how many bylaws they invented, they never really owned this land. I did. The early morning sun filtered through the blinds of Zeke Thornfield's temporary trailer as he sipped strong black coffee, watching dust swirl in the beam of light. In the days since the court ruling, news of his victory had spread like wildfire. Reporters lined the fence beyond his property, drone cameras buzzing overhead. But Zeke had work to do. While the HOA board and residents scrambled to process their looming eviction, Zeke was already preparing the next phase of his plan. His grandfather's 1924 easement not only gave him legal ownership of the land, but also granted him access rights to the utility corridors, water, gas, and power, that had been illegally tied into his infrastructure. Zeke coordinated with county officials, who, now backed by the judge's order, shut off all municipal services connected to the subdivision. Within hours, the faucets went dry, the lights flickered out, and the air conditioners stopped humming. Karen, who had retreated into the HOA Operations Center, a small portable building placed at the center of the cul-de-sac, stood fuming, red-faced and raging into her phone. Her voice echoed across the neighborhood, blaming lawyers, developers, and anyone else she could think of, except herself. A few residents packed their cars, driving off with suitcases and boxes. Others stood outside in disbelief, clutching notices Zeke had posted on every door, offering 2 weeks to vacate or face trespassing charges. Zeke didn't gloat. He didn't throw a party or mock the residents. He simply walked the perimeter with Sheriff Dwyer, ensuring the boundaries were respected. The sheriff tipped his hat to Zeke. "You're handling this cleaner than most would have." Zeke nodded. "It's not about revenge, it's about setting things right." That evening, as darkness settled over the now powerless homes, Zeke stood on a hill overlooking the subdivision. He remembered riding horses through those fields as a boy, the scent of juniper in the air, the sound of crickets rising at dusk. He pulled out his grandfather's old journal, flipping through pages of handwritten maps and observations. That land wasn't just property, it was history, legacy, and now it was back where it belonged. From the distance, a group of families gathered by flashlight near a moving truck. A child pointed at Zeke. One of the parents approached him, nervous but sincere. "We didn't know," she said quietly. "We bought our house thinking it was legal. We're sorry." Zeke looked her in the eye. "You've got 2 weeks. After that, I can't help you. But until then, if you need water or a generator, I can spare a few things." The woman's eyes welled with tears, and she nodded. Zeke turned back toward the ranch, his boots crunching over dry grass. The homes would be gone soon, the roads would be torn up, the lots cleared, and in their place maybe wildflowers would grow again, maybe not, but one thing was certain, that land knew who it belonged to, and Zeke Thornfield made sure it never forgot. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was flooded with calls. Local news stations had caught wind of the court's decision, and now every outlet wanted an interview with the rancher who outlawed an HOA. It wasn't just reporters, lawyers, developers, even history buffs were reaching out, amazed by the use of a 100-year-old easement to win back nearly 100 homes, but the real storm hadn't hit yet. That came when Karen and her crew realized what the ruling actually meant. I didn't just win a legal point. I owned it all, every front lawn, every backyard barbecue setup, every shiny new mailbox. Overnight, I went from the quiet rancher they ignored to the legal owner of their dream homes. Karen tried to calm her board down, saying they'd appeal, they'd renegotiate, they'd fight back, but her voice didn't carry the same iron authority it once did. Now it sounded panicked, shrill, the kind of voice people stop following when they realize their queen isn't wearing any clothes. My lawyer advised I keep things professional, don't gloat, don't antagonize, but I wasn't planning to. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in resolution, and that meant walking the land, my land, and facing the people who'd trespassed, built, and now lived here. First walkthrough was surreal. Parents hurried their kids inside. A couple residents tried to act tough, shouting that they had rights, but many just stared, some even apologized. One older gentleman with shaky hands offered me lemonade and said, "I had no idea. I'm so sorry." I didn't need to hear that from everyone. Just a few honest faces were enough to remind me that not everyone here was like Karen. Some were victims too, sold a lie wrapped in granite countertops and community pools. Still, ownership had changed, and I needed to decide what came next. 2 weeks passed after the court ruling, and every one of those days was heavier than the last. I didn't bulldoze a single home. I didn't evict a single family. But the fact remained, legally I could, and that truth sat in the air like a thundercloud ready to break. Karen kept pushing. She filed emergency motions to delay enforcement. She pleaded with county officials to intervene. But no one wanted to touch it, especially after learning the HOA had ignored clear title records, zoning maps, and easement laws for years. Her name was poison now. Vendors stopped answering her calls. The HOA board began resigning, one by one, leaving her to stand alone in a crumbling empire of stucco and denial. Behind the scenes, I worked with a new legal team, this time not to fight, but to build. I drafted a plan that offered every homeowner two choices. They could purchase the land their homes sat on at a fair price, or they could relocate with a generous assistance package. No tricks, no bait, and switch. Just a clean exit or a clean title. About half of them accepted the purchase option. These were folks who had steady jobs and wanted stability. They weren't interested in Karen's fantasy of fighting forever. They just wanted peace. The other half took the relocation offer, surprised it was real, even more surprised it was fair. I helped move families into nearby homes that weren't tied up in lawsuits and lies. Kids got to stay in their school districts. Elderly couples were moved with care and dignity. It wasn't easy, but it was just. Karen, she refused both options. She still lived in the largest house at the end of the cul-de-sac, the one with the columned porch and gold-plated address numbers. Every evening, I saw her standing in the window like a statue of bitterness, blinds cracked open just enough to watch the world she built fall away brick by brick. On the 30th day after the judgment, her grace period ended. I knocked on her door myself. She didn't answer. I left a final notice taped neatly beside the brass handle. The paper simply read, "This house sits on land you do not own. Vacate within 72 hours or face formal removal." It wasn't revenge. It was reality. The same reality she forced on so many when the HOA was strong and cruel and untouchable. Now the tables had turned, and the clock was ticking. Karen didn't leave. The 72-hour window passed like a storm cloud that never quite burst, just loomed, menacing and dark. I waited, out of decency, out of respect, but also out of curiosity. What would someone like her do when the illusion of control was stripped away? On the 4th day, my lawyer filed the formal eviction order. The sheriff's office scheduled the enforcement, and the neighborhood held its breath. People peeked from behind curtains. Former HOA allies now watched silently, not lifting a finger to help the woman who once ruled them like a tyrant. Her kingdom had no loyalists anymore, only neighbors tired of fear. When the deputies arrived, Karen didn't scream. She didn't argue. She opened the door slowly, dressed in all black, her lips painted crimson like some kind of mourning queen. She said nothing as they walked through her now empty house, no furniture, no boxes, just bare walls and the sound of footsteps echoing through the home that had once been her throne. She'd moved everything out during the night, silently, without even a goodbye to the street she once owned. When they reached the porch, she turned once, looked at me standing by my truck, and said only, "You think you've won?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. This wasn't about winning. This was about righting something that should never have gone so wrong. She walked past me without another word and got into an aging white Mercedes that still bore a license plate frame reading, HOA President Deal with IT. She drove off without looking back, and with that, the shadow lifted. The days that followed were busy. I transferred deeds to the homeowners who'd purchased their lots. The families who'd relocated sent postcards and thank you letters. One little girl drew me a picture of her new backyard, with stick figures labeled me and my new friend, under a bright sun. I kept that one on my fridge. The land Karen had built on was now mine again, not in name, but in truth. It was honest now. It breathed again. The last home to be dismantled was hers. I hired a demolition crew, gave them clear instructions, remove it gently, not as an act of aggression, but as a symbol of closure. When the last brick came down, I stood in the field that had once been my family's. No walls, no fences, just open sky and a breeze I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't angry anymore, I wasn't vengeful, I was free, and that, in the end, was worth more than any courtroom victory, more than any plot of land, more than proving anything to anyone. This was peace, earned, not taken, and no HOA could ever build over that again.